All right, let's talk about manual lenses. Yes, manual. You get full control. If manual, because I know that there are people where, they say autofocus is way better than manual focus, but here's the thing. If that was true, then Pentax would not include quick shift manual override on their autofocus lenses, right? From cars to microwaves to stoves, ovens, the thermostat in your home, it's nice to have manual control over parameters. Sometimes the computer gets it wrong. So let's go into manual lenses on the K3 Mark III, everything you need to do to have the best experience possible when you're shooting with a manual lens. So first things first, let's go to my box of tricks. Just put my coffee down here. Get my light open. And in my box of tricks, I've got some manual lenses here. As you can see, I've got 70 or 8200 push-pull. Which I'm not going to do this one because this is a whole other beast. Whole other beast. It is a cool concept of a lens though. Very cool concept of a lens. Yeah, 8200 push-pull bayonet mount. Actually, no, we'll start with something simple. If you're interested, I will showcase this lens another time. Let's see, what bayonet lens should I use? Which one is this? Magnanon. Okay. Yeah, we'll use this one. The Magnanon Series G MC 7210. It's an interesting lens. It's also a push-pull lens. So, yeah, we'll try out the Magnanon. Why not? So the easiest way to tell if you have a manual focus lens is look at how many pins are on the back of the lens. In this diagram, you have the Pentax M, which is completely manual. There's no automatic aperture pin. It's just the mount with some screws holding it together, and that's it. In the middle, you have the Pentax A, which is auto aperture, and there's one contact which sends the aperture information to the camera. And then you have the more modern auto lens, which includes, on this one, it's screw drive autofocus, as well as the contacts for focal length and aperture and focus acquisition. And furthermore to this one, there are a couple of additional contacts in the black area, and that is for the DC motor, SDM motor, PLM motor, basically the lenses that do not rely on screw drive, so they have their own autofocus motor. There are additional contacts for that. So if you have a manual focusing lens, it'll either be A or M. Okay, so let's just swap out the lenses. Just push the button. Line up the red dot to the red dot. And there you go. So now we are in manual lens mode. So let's see what that's all about. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to want to do is set up the manual lens parameters, right? So here we've got manual focus lens focal length. So it starts at 35 millimeters. And you can adjust this to whatever millimeters. So if you generally use a 35, then you can have it so it defaults to 35. Right? If you generally use, say, a 105, then you can change it to 105. So every time you mount a lens, that will be the lens focal length input, which is to help the shake reduction system know what focal length lens you're using, because again, there are no contacts electronically to tell the camera what the lens focal length is, right? So I'm using a variable zoom, so that becomes a little more difficult. Yeah, so it's in, what was it, a 7200. So you know what, I'll leave it at 135. Not that it's really going to make much of a difference. And you can look at your select history, right? You know, there's some preset ones here. Yes, Pentax did make a 1000 millimeter Takumar lens way back in the day. But let's just go with 135 here. And this is important. So length input on startup, right? So if we turn that off and then shut the camera down and then turn the camera back on, it presents you with just the standard screen, right? Now, if we change this to length input on startup, it will recognize that there's a manual focus lens and you'll be presented with this screen. And as you can see, it has the 135, which I had just input. And yeah, so I suggest that you do turn on the length input at startup. Use aperture ring. I would leave that on. Aperture record info. So the K-3 Mark III has a feature where you can manually change the aperture that you're shooting with if you're not using auto aperture on the lens. So if you have decided that, you know, for this shot it'll be f3.5 or f2.8 or 1.8, 1.4, whatever it is, you can set the camera so on the dial it will record the aperture that you used into the Exif data, which comes in pretty handy, especially if you're comparing different shots of, say, the same subject and you're using different apertures and you want to know which aperture presented you with whichever shot. It won't provide that information on the aperture that was used, right? Again, if you're not using auto aperture and it's a completely manual lens with no aperture input to record in the camera, you have no idea what apertures you actually used. You'd be using the aperture ring, and that information is never recorded. So I do suggest you put aperture info record on, and we'll go through this as well. So you can manually input the value of the aperture while you're shooting. So when you change the aperture ring, say from 1.8 to 2.8, then you can dial in the aperture on the camera and it'll record it into the Exif info. So the other parameter that I suggest you do would be to turn on catch and focus. So in the menu, autofocus with viewfinder, go all the way down to the bottom and you've got your catch and focus. So with catch and focus, the camera, as long as the camera is set to focus priority for firing the shutter, as long as the image is out of focus, the camera will not fire. As you manually adjust the focus of the lens, once it comes into focus, then it will fire. We will go over that as well. So catch and focus is on, so we should be good to go. If you're using a manual lens with auto aperture and you have the focus ring set to auto, you'll notice here the aperture is highlighted in blue. As soon as I take it off of auto aperture, it turns black and the F starts flashing. And this is where you can dial in which aperture you're actually using. It goes all the way up to f64. This lens does not go to 64, and it's definitely not a f1 lens. So just keep in mind that with every adjustment you make, you are selecting the correct aperture that you're using, which will help with your Exif data, the processing element of it, so you know which aperture you used in regards to which photo you took. Okay, so I have the camera at facing the steps, and it is now out of focus. So let's push the shutter down all the way. And as you can see, the hexagon is flashing to indicate it is completely out of focus, right? And the camera is not firing. So I'm going to keep my shutter button pressed down all the way and slowly adjust the focus of the lens and wait for it. There you go. As soon as it comes into focus, then the camera will fire. So that is pretty clutch, especially if you're using a manual focus lens, because as you can see, digital cameras with viewfinders, they aren't the greatest in regards to manual focus compared to the old school SLRs from the film era with split focus screens and things like that. However, the viewfinder in the K3 Mark III is pretty good for manual focus. Now, the other thing I forgot to mention is the fact that in order for this to work, you need to keep the camera in autofocus. So you need to keep this here, even though you're using a manual focus lens, because it's taking the light coming in from the lens, and from there it knows once the beam is focused onto the sensor, then it knows that it's in focus, and then that's what will trigger it. So this has to remain in autofocus. So the nice thing about catch and focus is that it acts as a focus trap. So other than you manually adjusting the focus of the lens, you can have the lens set at a preset focus distance and then wait for a subject to trip the in focus area. So I've got my 1650 f2.8 PLM on the chair here. I'm going to activate shooting. So my shutter is pressed all the way down. Now I'm just going to move the chair out so this lens becomes in focus. And there you go. So here I have it at f4 on the aperture ring, and just dial this down to f4, right? If I want to use 5.6, switch it to 5.6, f8, switch it to f8. It's really intuitive. It takes practically no time at all. And yeah, it's a really, really great feature in regards to being able to record the Exif data that you're using. And then you've got your auto, so it'll just be controlled by the camera itself when you shoot, right? And that's pretty much what we've got. I'm not sure if you can see that inside. Let's close this down. So F22, open aperture metering. That's not going to take a shot because I have catch and focus on. So let's switch this to live view. I found that it does not work in live view. So if we do the preview, see it gets dark, gets bright, gets dark, and out of focus, in focus. Now let's change the aperture down to f4. Do preview. It doesn't have to shut the aperture down because it's already wide open, right? So there you go. Alright, I'm just going to take a shot of a little bit of snow on my tree here as I zoom out with my body until it's in focus. There we go. And another thing I noticed here is that it does not give you an exposure meter because it can't read the aperture itself when you're using a manual aperture or the focus ring. So you just have to remember all the tips and tricks of exposure, triangle, and all that fun stuff. And the other thing too is this is a very, very soft lens. Very, very soft. Kind of a dreamy look, but still pretty soft. Extremely soft. Before I conclude this video, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that I know that some of the stuff was just slightly out of focus. Still coming to grips with this wide angle body camera that I got. Trying it out. It will get better, I promise. I'm realizing the focus distance isn't quite what I thought it was. But anyway, onward and upward. So what can we take away from this video? Well, first of all, with Pentax's remarkable backwards compatibility, they have gone out of their way to make sure that your experience with manual lenses is as smooth as possible. Even with the older bodies, you still have catch and focus, which is a great focus trap that's built into the camera. And you know, just having that lightning quick focus confirmation when something is in focus is clutch when you're using a manual lens, a manual focus lens. Now, the K-3 Mark III takes that to a whole other level with you being able to record the Exif data of the aperture that you used on a lens that does not feed that information to the camera. So, yeah, I mean, I think I've pretty much covered everything there is in regards to shooting a manual lens on a Pentax camera. Yeah, so if you like the video, leave a like. If you have not already, please do subscribe, helps me out. And yes, I know this was a fairly lengthy video, but there was a lot to cover and show exactly how it works in real life situations, real time. Yeah, so if you have any other suggestions of videos you'd like to see me produce, let me know. Keep the conversations friendly. Yeah, some of you know what I'm talking about. I know you read the comments from one of my recent videos from one person. It's very bizarre, but anyway, yeah, just keep the comments proper. All right. Yeah, if you want to support the channel, that info's at the bottom of the description. Remember, you can also become a member of the channel. You get some exclusive perks, such as some DNGs that you can download from some of my excursions, so you can play around with them, and some exclusive videos and early release of videos as well. And that's going to be it. I'm going to go. I'll catch you on the next video. I'm out.